So there I was in Barrie, Ontario yesterday afternoon at a delightful brew pub called Flying Monkeys. The slogan for this brewery slash restaurant is, quote, normal is weird, end quote. You know, what a fitting place for Justin Trudeau to drop by for a meet and greet photo op. Because when it comes to this so-called new normal that we're enduring, normal is very, very weird indeed. Now, I had some questions for the Prime Minister, most of them related to the upcoming vaccine passports. For example, I wanted to ask him the following. Is the vaccine passport permanent? Will religious exemptions to the passport be permitted? Will the vaccine passport recognize natural immunity for people who got COVID and recovered? And what will be the consequences for those Canadians who refuse to get vaccinated? Now, I think those are fair questions, and I also had some queries regarding Canada's immoral disgrace when it comes to leaving interpreters and their families stranded behind in Afghanistan, which may prove to be a death sentence for them. And of course, I wanted to know if Justin would have the moral integrity to step down if he fails to get a majority mandate come September 20th, because, hey, let's face it, folks, that's what this election is really all about. But while we have freedom of the press in Canada, Justin Trudeau, the fanboy of the People's Republic of China, doesn't care to embrace such a concept. Well, that's not entirely true, because there are those journalists the Prime Minister is happy to shoot the breeze with, whereas other sluggos are persona non grata. So how does one tell who's who in the journalistic zoo? Which scribes are on the favored nations list and who are the pariahs, at least the pariahs in the eyes of the Liberal Party of Canada? Well, that's easy peasy, folks. Government-funded media, which once upon a time was known as the mainstream media, they are welcomed with open arms by Prime Minister Trudeau. Indeed, check out this footage from yesterday in Barrie. You know, there's a big red bus for Justin Trudeau and his staff, and there's another almost identical big red bus for the approved media types. They travel around together like one big happy convoy, along with about 7 Chevy Suburbans full of Mounties. Golly, that's a lot of carbon, isn't it? But I digress, because after Justin Trudeau bolted out the pub's back door to the safety of his bus, I spotted a government-funded journalist pounding out some pithy prose while sitting on a staircase. She turned out to be Marika Walsh of the Globe and Mail, and I thought I'd ask her a question or two. Check out the video. What are you in there? Are you with the mainstream media?
I'm not talking to you.
Oh, it says media Marika Walsh. Just wondering, getting government money, do you think you can objectively report on Prime Minister Trudeau, Marika? Ms. Walsh, are you able to be non-biased in your reporting, even though you're getting paid by the Trudeau Liberals? Wow, for someone who asks questions for a living and expects those questions to be promptly asked, Ms. Walsh sure doesn't like to be queried herself. But really, isn't she obliged to provide answers? You and I and some 38 million other Canadians now contribute towards paying her salary. But no, the only quote is, I'm not talking to you. Now there's gratitude for you. Rebel News journalists are not allowed on the press bus, of course, and I found out that I wasn't even allowed to come into the brew pub, either as a journalist or a paying customer. Check out my reaction with Norman the doorman. Sir, are you an employee at this establishment? Yeah. Are you allowed to let me in? Are you allowed to let me in? I'm David Menzies with Rebel News. You are not. Is this a private affair for Justin Trudeau? It isn't. So if it's open to the public, can I just come in, buy a beer? Is that yes or no? What about you, ma'am? You're telling him what to say. Can I come in and buy a beer as a customer?
Unfortunately, we've closed the doors for anyone coming in at the moment.
Oh, there was just a whole bunch of people that walked in front of me right now.
That wasn't up to me.
No? Okay then. You know, I hear Flying Monkeys brews superb beer. I guess I'll have to take their word for it. Nevertheless, from the sidewalk, I was able to get within 2 meters of the Prime Minister, and I fired away with my questions. But given the lack of response, I think Justin is either deaf or he automatically clams up big time when he sees a Rebel News flash on a microphone. Vaccine passports be permanent? Mr. Trudeau, will there be religious exemptions for the passports? What are the consequences for Canadians not taking the vaccine, Mr. Trudeau? Mr. Trudeau, why have you abandoned our allies in Afghanistan? Mr. Trudeau, will you resign if you fail to gain a majority? But you know, it's both frustrating and disturbing. Shouldn't elected officials or those vying for public office have a duty to answer questions, even prickly questions? Or will these politicians only talk to people who they agree with? And it's not just Trudeau. Check out my colleague, Tamara Ugolini. Check out how she was treated the other day when she tried to ask questions of Liberal candidate Anita Anand.
Party of Canada doesn't recognize you as a media source.
Email last night from the Liberal Party that showed that you are for open and transparency, and you actually, the wording in there was that you facilitate media coverage, so you're not allowing us as independent journalists into this event?
You're not invited to this event. I'm sorry.
And the event, was it an invite-only event?
This is an event that you're not invited to.
Sorry. Minister Anand, I have a question for you. The Liberals are campaigning on openness and transparency, and I face barriers to get here as a woman trying to work. Will you give me 5 minutes of your time?
Gee, what a visual, eh? After exiting the Cadillac coupe, Anita literally runs away while her blob-like bodyguard turns into a human barricade. Pathetic. Oh, and it's not just Liberals playing this game, folks. In the Department of Cowardice, check out how my colleague in Quebec, Alexa Lavoie, was treated at a Bloc Québécois presser.
Va être brimé. Quelle est votre position par rapport à ça?
Vous m'envoyez sincèrement, désolé madame, parce que bien que votre question apparaisse tout à fait raisonnable, je maintiens la politique de ne pas répondre aux questions de Rebel News.
Well, in the Department of Silver Linings within dark clouds of despair, at least Blanchette was polite to Alexa. But again, if Mr. Blanchette is afraid of answering questions from Alexa or other Rebel News journalists, questions that he himself admits are good ones, then what else is he afraid of? And is this a man who truly has the right stuff when it comes to being a leader? But perhaps the biggest head scratcher when it comes to getting interviews with zip-lipped politicians is none other than Conservative Party of Canada leader Erin O'Toole. Apparently, O'Toole has imbibed the rebel derangement syndrome Kool-Aid too, and that is most curious. You know, our audience is huge, 1.5 million YouTube subscribers alone, the lion's share of that number surely being red meat conservatives. Our audience numbers are bigger than the CBC's national newscast, and yet Mr. O'Toole is apparently following the same grossly flawed strategy Andrew Scheer embraced in 2019, namely shun Rebel News and court the mean girls of the media party, such as the CBC and the Toronto Star. Oh, and we all know how well that turned out for Mr. Scheer. Despite Justin Trudeau's scandals, too numerous to mention in this space, the journalistic jackals in the media ignored such things as Gropegate and blackface and instead went after Scheer, given that he allegedly fibbed about his brokerage credentials and being a dual citizen. Ooh, that's the stuff of serious scandal, is it not? The problem is that Scheer in 2019, much like O'Toole in 2021, doesn't realize that the vast majority of people toiling in the mainstream media loathe conservatives and absolutely hate the Conservative Party of Canada. You want proof in the proverbial pudding, folks? Consider the Unifor ad that debuted earlier this month. Most of the government-funded journalists are members of this union. Check out the open disdain Unifor has for Mr. O'Toole.
The next model of conservative is here. Meet the 2021 OToole, ready to steer Canada in the wrong direction. Engineered by big corporations to leave us behind. Driven to cut healthcare and public services, just like Jason Kenney. Another out-of-touch politician at a price we can't afford. Meet the 2021 OToole. New name, same old conservative.
Well, at least Unifor is transparent in terms of its visceral hatred for all things conservative. And yet, when my colleague Lincoln Jay ventured to Richmond Hill last night to scrum Mr. O'Toole, the Conservative leader had no time for Lincoln, the party line being that we are too disruptive. Check out this clip and ask yourself, was Lincoln being disruptive? Were his questions unfair?
Mr. O'Toole, are vaccine passports a temporary or permanent solution? Trudeau said he'll allow medical exemptions. Are you looking to provide religious exemptions?
Sure. Geez, what a difference a year makes, eh? Last summer, when Aaron O'Toole was vying to be the leader of the Conservative Party, he attended the Independent Press Gallery event, which Rebel News was part of course, and he openly entertained questions from yours truly. But alas, that was when Mr. O'Toole was merely a candidate, not the leader of the party. That was when he was running on a platform of being pro-free speech and anti-cancel culture. I would argue now that since becoming leader, Aaron O'Toole has not come as advertised. And as far as political strategy goes, vis-a-vis Andrew Scheer, well, as the Who once sang, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. In the final analysis, all of these politicians who are embracing the cone of silence when it comes to Rebel News and other independent media outlets are committing a gross disservice to Canadians from coast to coast. These are very important times in which we live, and there are so many crucial issues that must be addressed moving forward. For these so-called leaders to keep their lips zipped tightly when confronted by tough yet fair questions is not only cowardly, but it is also an act of disrespect against Canadians and even an affront to the democratic process. You know, folks, I can't help but think of that infamous quote by Prime Minister for a day, Kim Campbell, way back in 1993, namely, quote, "An election is no time to discuss serious issues," end quote. Wow, back in 1993, Kim was crucified for stating that half-baked policy. But geez, who knew that by 2021, Kim wasn't a nutter, but rather she was just way, way ahead of the curve, unfortunately.
That's an excerpt from my daily show, The Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.